Hey everybody, Mike Iaconelli back out here in the shop, continuing our series on the Tokyo Rig. If you've watched our last two episodes, you remember the heavy-duty flipping hook for punching, flipping, and pitching a Tokyo Rig to heavy cover. You also got to see the HD worm hook using a Tokyo Rig around more sparse cover, open water, fishing things like straight tail worms and ribbon tail worms, presenting the bait in a different way. Today, here we are on number 3 of ways to rig a Tokyo, and we are going to change it up. And in today's way of rigging Tokyos, we're going to be talking about using a Tokyo rig for deep water. For deep water. It's amazing to me that since first seeing this technique 7 or 8 years ago in Japan as a shallow water heavy cover technique, how Tokyo rigging has evolved. It's going from shallow to mid-depth to deep and with different types of lures. And that's what we're going to look at today. And today we're going to look at fishing a Tokyo rig deep with a swim bait. And you're going to get to see a lot of the same features and benefits that makes Tokyo rigging better than normal jig head or Texas rig fishing. All right, let's start with the hardware. Once again, I've got a VMC Tokyo rig in my hand, but instead of a straight shank flipping hook or an HD worm hook, this one has an HD wide gap hook, extra wide gap hook, okay? I'm going to take this thing out of the pack. And you're going to see that it's the same great Tokyo rig system, just with that EWG style hook. And here we go. There's our Tokyo rig, and you know what it is by now. We've got a barrel swivel attached to a welded or solid O-ring. There's our EWG hook, VMC EWG hook. And then below that on the ring is our 3-inch rigid wire. And if you look at that hook, if you look at that wide gap EWG style hook, this is going to give us the ability to rig bigger, larger, fatter lures on there, right? So now we're talking about big creatures, plastics with a lot of appendages, plastics with thick bodies. And one of the best for this system, deep water Tokyo rigging, is a boot tail style swim bait. Boot tail style swim bait. This is one of my favorites right here. This is a Berkley Power Bait 4-3 Power Swimmer. Remember, that extra wide gap hook, right? That VMC hook comes from a 1/0 all the way up to a 6. So you can pick different size baits, but this is one of my favorites right here. This is a 4/0 wide gap, and this is the 4-3 Power Swimmer. So you take this swim bait out of the pack, you're going to see your very traditional boot tail style swim bait. A lot of companies make this style swim bait. And when people are fishing this swim bait deep, they're almost always fishing it on a weighted swim bait hook or a jig head, right? A 3/8, ½ ounce, 3/4 ounce, whatever it is, jig head, right? But that weight, that jig head is attached to the hook, it's attached to the bait. We talked about the benefits of the Tokyo. And now we're going to get it in deep water as well, okay? So first things first, there's that Berkley Power Swimmer 4-3. I'm going to rig it my normal Texas style, which I'm going to go in that swim bait about 1/8 of an inch. I'm going to push it out. I'm going to go around the bend of that hook, that 4/0 extra wide gap hook, all the way to the ring. And this time, when I rig it Texas style, I'm going to Texpose it. And all Texpose it means, as I want to show you, is that the bait is still straight, but I'm actually going to leave a little bit of that hook point just sort of riding on the top of that bait, right? A lot of this deep water fishing, I'm going to be in more sparse cover, more open water, so I'm going to T-expose it. I'm going to leave a little bit of that point out. If I'm fishing deep with this Tokyo swim bait around thick cover, all I do is go back and just embed it into the body more, and now I'm snagless. But normally, sparse cover, open water, I'm going to T-expose. I'm going to leave a little bit of that hook open. Okay, now we're going to add our weight. You remember from the other series, there's my 3-inch black rigid wire with an open end. And you could add any weight you want. But for this deeper water swim bait style Tokyo rigging, I'm going to add a really cool specialty weight designed by VMC. And this is the VMC tungsten rugby weight. And if you're a fan of the rugby head or the rugby jig heads, you know that a rugby head is almost a football shape. Real broad shoulders, and those broad shoulders helps this style of weight get through cover. Obviously rock, it's tremendous around rock, but also wood, gravel, docks, riprap, any of that cover, it's going to come through it really well. So we've got, this happens to be a 1/2 ounce rugby head, and look at it, real broad, super broad shoulders. And just like a traditional worm weight, this VMC tungsten rugby weight has a hole right in the middle. So there's our black 3-inch rigid wire. We're going to drop that rugby straight down, okay? We're going to get our pliers. We're going to close that wire. We're going to make that little R bend in it. I like to bend it all the way down. Keep it straight. And remember, when we close that, now that weight is stuck on there, but listen, tungsten weight making noise, hitting that R bend, and we can open that R bend back up and change our weight size on the fly. If we're deeper, we go to a heavier weight. If we go shallower, a lighter weight. If there's no wind, a lighter weight. If the wind picks up, a heavier weight. But look at this now. Traditional Tokyo rig, but with a swim bait and a rugby style weight on the bottom. And this is the perfect tool to fish deep. The way that I fish this is a lot like how you would fish a regular jig head swim bait, or even maybe a regular biffle style, rugby style jig head with a swim bait on the back. And I'm going to cast this thing out. I'm going to let it sink to the bottom. As it's falling, I watch my line. Occasionally you'll get a bite on the fall. But once that bait hits the bottom, once it contacts the bottom, I engage my reel and I begin a slow, steady retrieve. And that rugby head is keeping bottom contact the entire time you're slowly reeling it. And it's taking all the abuse, right? Remember, the rugby head is on a rigid wire. It's Tokyo rigged, so that weight's not connected to the jig head. So if I was slow reeling a swim bait on a jig head, the swim bait's on the bottom and it's taking all the abuse. It's getting buried in the muck, zebra mussels, gravel, it's getting caught. But not now. Because as I slowly reel it in that deep water on the bottom, the weight's taking the abuse. The bait is above the weight 3 inches. In addition to that, look at all this side-to-side movement I get. I don't get that if I'm fishing this swim bait on a Texas rig or a biffle head or a jig head. I don't get it. But because that weight is down, look at it. 360 degrees, side to side, up and down, fluidity of movement. Last but not least, you've heard me say it with the other two techniques. As I slow reel this thing on the bottom, and that thing's maintaining bottom contact, and this bait's above it, when that fish eats this swim bait in deep water, ready? Look, watch this, ready? He's got hook and bait. Look at that weight below it. When that fish eats this in deep water, he doesn't eat the weight. That 3/8, half ounce, 3/4 ounce rugby weight, it's not impeding on the hook set. When you set the hook, it doesn't blow it out of his mouth because it's not attached. That weight's below. And when that fish gets it, look at the hook. All hook. Nothing to impede your hook set. 20% more fish in the boat. So using a swim bait or a big worm or a fat creature with this bigger extra wide gap hook in deep water is a great system. In addition to the slow reel method with the swim bait, I also will drag it a lot. Side sweep it and drag it just like a Carolina rig, sort of maintaining contact but letting that bait slide in the back. On tackle, you heard me say it with the other two, the great thing about fishing a Tokyo rig with a swim bait in deep water, you don't need specialty rods and reels. You're going to use the same exact rod, reel, and line that you would use if you were fishing that swim bait on a jig head or on a weighted swim bait hook. The same exact rod, reel, and line. And I really, really love a 7.4 to 7.6 medium heavy rod when I'm throwing that swim bait deep. I designed a rod from Abu Garcia. It's the 7.4 medium heavy Power Series rod. That rod was designed especially for fishing swim baits. Reel, same reel you normally use. A low profile, fast gear ratio reel. Something that's 7-to-1 or greater. I use an 8-to-1 Revo Ike. And last but not least, the same line you would use when you're fishing these swim baits. Braid to a Flora leader or straight Flora is my normal setup. I like 15 or 17 pound Berkeley Trilene 100% fluorocarbon. It lets the bait get down fast, it lets it maintain bottom contact, and it gives it more natural action. So same rod, reel, and line that you'd use on a regular swim bait on a jig head. The benefits of fishing this Tokyo rig deep are so many. Increased action, letting the weight take the abuse, increased hookup percentage, so many different reasons to fish this versus a swim bait on a jig head. The bottom line is the fish don't see it, you're gonna get more bites. Man, I hope you're enjoying this series. This was the third installment of the Tokyo rig system to catch big bass. If you like what you're seeing, take a second and hit my subscribe button right there. We're gonna get new content to you every single week. If you're already subscribed to my channel, please do me a favor. Tell your fishing friends about Mike Iaconelli Fishing on YouTube. We've got great secrets and techniques every single week. Hope you enjoyed this one. One left to go on fishing a Tokyo rig. We'll see you next week.